Hello, everybody. My name is Spencer Oriot, and today I'm happy to talk to you guys about the economics of continuous assurance in cybersecurity. So what we're really dealing with here is really two aspects of cybersecurity that kind of combine and create a kind of a interesting situation. So the first one is the high level of interdependence in outcomes. So essentially what we're kind of getting at here is really like the decisions that you make affect other people. And yet we also have the other side of this is that when those decisions are being made, they're really being made in an individual capacity. So when people are making those decisions individually, it's more similar to kind of like a decentralized decision making, and that doesn't always reflect the interdependence that's at play. So that basically allows you to kind of ignore some of the harm that you might cause. So these are really two ingredients that are pretty typical of market failures. So before I get into that, I want to talk about very quickly what are the elements of a functioning market, just to be kind of complete here. So there are 5 elements of a functioning market. Just go through them quickly because we're all familiar with all of them. The first is, of course, a product. Then we've got to have a way to make the product. Buyers. Then you have to have sellers, and of course, a market where all of this has to come together for the transaction to take place. So now moving back to the market failure. The definition of a market failure is where individual incentives in the market lead people to behave in ways that they really don't consider the group outcome, the collective outcome. So essentially, following their individual incentives leads enough people that collectively they're worse off than if they had considered that as a group. So there are 3 main reasons for market failure. They're tied to the first one is tied to the nature of the market. So this is most familiar to people as kind of like a monopoly. So somebody's got a lot of market power, they can set prices. The next one is the nature of the goods. So things like public goods are, for example, like non-excludable. You can't really keep people out of a public park once it's built. And the last one is the nature of the exchange. And this is really where the bulk of the problem is. And this is really any of the elements of a functioning market could go wrong here, and that would create a market failure. So this is really kind of the wild card here. So in cybersecurity, this shows up in 2 ways. The first is rational inattention, and then the second that we'll talk about is bargaining costs. So starting with rational inattention, let's start with an example. So what I want to compare is, whether, is it worth it to you to make an effort to protect yourself from cyber attacks, for example, right? So there's research involved, it requires time and effort. So we want to look at whether or not that's worth it. So let's say in both cases, in our example, the loss from an attack would be $10. The benefit of doing the research is you can reduce your probability of that loss from 50 down to 10%. The expected loss then, of course, is $5 and $1, and then the research cost that corresponds with these situations is $0 and $5. So if you add all that up, it turns out actually you're worse off having done the research. So when we say rationally inattentive, that's what we mean, is that your best option was to not do anything, is just let whatever happens happen. So there are tons of people like this. So this loss actually kind of builds up, but the economics work out the same for all of these people. So from their perspective, it's rational. But now if you add in the next 2 rows here, let's look at the effect of those people researching and not researching on a larger company, where that ripple effect kind of builds up. So in our example, we'll say that a larger company, right, like this, they might suffer a $5,000 loss when people take lower precautions, and a $1,000 loss otherwise, directly as a result of these people. So essentially, there's a $4,000 difference there versus which is more than enough to cover the research cost of all of the people that created the problem in the first place. So there's a $3,500 surplus that's not being captured, and that would be what we're referring to as a market failure. So that leads us to the other side of this is the bargaining costs, and that's one potential reason that this is not happening. So we saw in the last example, the result of search and information costs and decision and coordination costs among both parties in that example. Another one that we didn't talk about and that we won't really get to today is monitoring and enforcement. But essentially after the deal is done, you have to make sure that people continue to honor the terms of the deal and deal with them if they don't. So that's kind of the economics 101 of this top to bottom. So let's kind of switch gears to look at maybe what if the research costs were lower and it actually was rational to do the research and protect yourself more, or even today those numbers were just an example. So maybe the numbers are different in reality. So one thing that we could do is look at attack trees. So that's basically what these model is, how do attackers achieve their objectives? And the way this is set up is that from what you want to do is eliminate the lowest cost options to attackers first, right? So you want to cut them off their cheapest way to get to your data, for example. So if you look at this chart here, going from left to right, it gets darker green, representing that it's more difficult for attackers to go through those routes. So for a little more concrete example of this, we can go to where I learned about this concept. Kelly Shortridge and Aaron Reinhardt, that you can see more about that at the link below. But let's kind of construct one of these ourselves. So using their example, you start with reality, which we all share, and then the attacker's objective. And you would add, how would an attacker get there just if I do nothing? And then you'd say like, okay, well, so how do I cut that off? So now you add the next branch, and then you do the same thing here. You look at how would an attacker get there? And then you do the same thing one more time. And then you just continue doing that. And then you end up with this map that shows all the ways that an attacker could get there. So of course, this requires that those paths are known. So the question becomes then, how do you discover those paths? So one potential option, again, comes from Kelly Shortridge and Ryan Petrich. It's called deception environments. And what these are is a virtualization, a virtual instance of a production environment that allows attackers to come in and it resembles a real environment to them. So they interact with it as though it was a real environment, which allows you to observe them and see what kind of new paths they've come up with, which paths they're using more often, things like that. So going back to our checklist of what makes up a functioning market, we've got the attack paths themselves, which are valuable. That's our product. We've got deception environments, which is a way of producing them. Buyers and sellers, lots of people would be certainly happy to avoid their losses. And then the fifth element is the market. So the economics of continuous assurance suggests that the easiest of the 5 elements to kind of stimulate is actually the one that's missing in this situation, which is actually kind of a positive note. So with that, thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions if you want to contact me afterwards. Thank you.